September 22nd, 2012, 1:42 a.m. A surveillance camera outside a bridal boutique on Sydney Road captured what looked like nothing at all. A woman standing on the sidewalk, a man in a dark hoodie beside her. They appeared calm, casual. Two strangers exchanging words beneath the streetlights of a quiet Melbourne night. She didn't scream. She didn't run. She didn't look afraid, because she had no reason to be. Her name was Jill Meagher, 29 years old, Irish-born, newly married, working her dream job at the Australian Broadcasting Corporation. She had just left a bar after drinks with coworkers. Her apartment was less than 10 minutes away. Minutes earlier, she had been laughing on the phone with her brother, promising she'd be home soon. She never made it. That single frame of CCTV footage would become the most haunting surveillance image Australia had ever seen. Not because of what it showed, but because of what it didn't. Within hours, Jill vanished. Within days, her handbag surfaced in a laneway already searched. Placed there deliberately, investigators believed. Within a week, the man from the footage was identified, arrested, and confessing. His name was Adrian Ernest Bayley, a convicted serial molester who should have been behind bars that night. A predator who stood on that sidewalk not for conversation, but for prey. The footage showed Jill speaking to a stranger she believed was harmless. A man who looked ordinary, who gave no sign of the monster he had always been. This is the story of how CCTV solved a murder, how a city became a manhunt, and how one woman's final moments were captured forever, frozen in a frame she never knew existed. If Jill's story stays with you, subscribe, a comment, a share. That's how these cases reach the people who need to hear them. Before she became a name on news bulletins, before her face was printed on missing person posters and shared across social media by strangers who had never met her, Jill Meagher was simply a woman building a life she loved. Born Gillian McKeon in Dublin, Ireland, she had grown up with the kind of warmth and wit that made people remember her. She was quick to laugh, fiercely intelligent, and deeply connected to her family. Even after she moved halfway around the world, Ireland never left her voice. It never left her heart either. Jill had arrived in Australia with her husband, Tom Meagher, a few years earlier. The couple had met in Ireland, fallen in love, and eventually decided to start fresh in Melbourne. It was the kind of decision young couples make when the world still feels wide open, when the future is something you build together, one choice at a time. They settled in Brunswick, a vibrant inner-city suburb just north of Melbourne's center. The neighborhood was known for its eclectic mix of cafes, vintage shops, and live music venues. Sydney Road, the main artery running through the area, was always alive with foot traffic, buskers, and the hum of daily life. It felt safe. It felt like home. Jill found work at the Australian Broadcasting Corporation, where she thrived in her role. Colleagues described her as passionate, hard-working, and genuinely kind. The sort of person who remembered birthdays, who checked in when someone seemed off, who made the office feel lighter just by being there. She had ambitions. She had plans. She talked about the future as though it were already waiting for her. At 29 years old, Jill Meagher had everything ahead of her. A career she cared about, a marriage that grounded her, a city that had become her own. She called her family in Ireland regularly. She laughed with her brother on the phone. She walked the same streets every day, trusting them the way anyone trusts the familiar. Brunswick was her neighborhood. Sydney Road was her route. And on most nights, the short walk home from the local bars and restaurants was nothing more than a few quiet minutes between one part of her life and the next. She had no reason to think otherwise. She had no reason to be afraid.
Please, please come home and whoever, just let her go, whatever. I'm sorry I can't do anymore.
Friday, September 21st, 2012 began like any other end to a working week. Jill finished her shift at the ABC and made plans to meet coworkers for drinks at a bar on Sydney Road. It was a casual gathering. Nothing formal, nothing unusual, just friends unwinding after a long week, sharing conversation and laughter over a few rounds. The bar was busy that night. Music played in the background. Voices overlapped. Jill moved easily among her colleagues, relaxed and in good spirits. She wasn't drinking heavily. She wasn't reckless. She was simply enjoying herself the way millions of people do on a Friday night, surrounded by familiar faces in a familiar place. As the hours passed and the crowd began to thin, Jill decided it was time to leave. Her apartment was close, just a short walk up Sydney Road. She had made the trip dozens of times before, often alone, often late. There was no reason to call a taxi, no reason to ask for company. The route was etched into her memory like a well-worn path. She stepped outside into the cool September night. The streets were quieter now, the bars beginning to empty, the sidewalks lit by the amber glow of streetlights. Jill walked north, her phone in her hand. At some point, she called her brother back in Ireland.
Her brother Michael, who took the call, says she was concerned about their father, who had a stroke a week ago.
She's the strong one in the family.
The conversation was light, easy. She told him she was almost home. She sounded happy. She sounded safe. The call ended. She kept walking. At 1:38 a.m., another surveillance camera captured her passing a shopfront, alone, moving steadily toward home. 4 minutes later, at 1:42 a.m., a second camera, this one mounted outside a bridal boutique, recorded something different. Jill had stopped. She was no longer alone. A man stood beside her on the sidewalk. He wore a dark hoodie. His posture was casual. They appeared to be talking. To anyone watching, it would have looked like nothing. A chance encounter. A stranger asking for directions. A brief interruption in an otherwise ordinary night. But that moment, frozen in. Grainy black and white footage would become the most scrutinized seconds of Jill Meagher's life. Because after that frame, she was never seen alive again. The footage lasts only a few seconds. It is grainy, silent, and captured from a fixed angle high above the street. There is no audio, no context, just a woman and a man standing beneath the glow of a streetlight outside a darkened shop window. Jill Meagher stands on the sidewalk, her body angled slightly toward the stranger. She does not appear distressed. Her posture is open, unhurried. She looks like someone pausing mid-step to answer a question or acknowledge a passing comment. The man beside her wears a dark hoodie, his face partially obscured. He stands close, but not aggressively so. His hands are not raised. His stance is relaxed. To the untrained eye, he could be anyone, a neighbor, a lost tourist, a harmless stranger asking for the time. Nothing about the image screams danger, and that is precisely what makes it so. Haunting. Jill had no reason to run, no reason to scream, no reason to believe that the man in front of her was anything other than a brief interruption on her walk home. She had grown up trusting the ordinary. She had walked this street 100 times. She was minutes from her front door. In the footage, she looks calm because she was calm. She had no idea. The camera captured approximately 20 seconds of the interaction before the two figures moved out of frame, walking in the same direction, away from the bar, away from the main stretch of Sydney Road, and into the darker, quieter streets beyond. That was the last confirmed sighting of Jill Meagher alive. The footage would not be reviewed for several more hours. It would not be released to the public for days. But once it was, it would become one of the most analyzed pieces of surveillance video in Australian criminal history. Every frame would be studied, every pixel examined. People across the country would watch the clip again and again, searching for something, anything, that might explain what happened next. But the footage offers no answers, only a frozen moment. A woman who believed she was safe, a stranger who had already decided what he was going to do, and a camera that recorded the truth before anyone knew to look for it.
Police are looking into bank records today to see if there's any activity on anything. So hopefully they get a location of that if the bank card has been used, because that was the only thing that was with her, a bank card and a phone. She left her purse at home.
Tom Meagher waited. At first, the silence didn't feel unusual. Jill had gone out with coworkers. She had probably stayed longer than expected. Bars on Sydney Road often kept people late, and Tom knew his wife. She was social, warm, the kind of person who lingered in conversations. He assumed she would walk through the door any minute, tired but smiling, ready to tell him about her night. But the minutes stretched into an hour, then 2. He called her phone. It rang out. He called again. No answer. He sent a message. Nothing. Tom checked the time. It was well past 2 a.m. now. The bars had closed. The streets would be empty. Jill should have been home long before this. He began to pace. By early morning, the silence had become unbearable. Tom contacted Jill's coworkers, hoping someone had seen her leave or knew where she might have gone. They confirmed what he already feared. She had left the bar alone, heading home on foot hours ago. She never arrived. Tom called the police. The official missing person report was filed on Saturday morning, September 22nd, just hours after Jill had last been seen. From the outset, investigators recognized that the circumstances were troubling. Jill was not the kind of person to disappear without explanation. She had no history of erratic behavior. She had no reason to run. Her phone, her wallet, her keys, all of it was unaccounted for. Detectives began retracing her steps. They reviewed CCTV footage from businesses along Sydney Road. They interviewed staff at the bar where she had spent the evening. They walked the same route she would have taken, searching for any sign of what might have happened. The investigation moved quickly, but every hour without answers deepened the dread. Tom Meagher stood at the center of it, caught between hope and horror, waiting for news that refused to come. Jill had vanished, and no one yet knew why. For 3 days, the investigation operated on fragile hope. Jill was missing, but there was no body, no confirmed crime. Detectives continued their search, scouring Sydney Road and the surrounding streets, interviewing witnesses, reviewing every frame of surveillance footage they could find. Then, on Tuesday, September 25th, everything changed. A passerby discovered a handbag discarded in a laneway off Hope Street, a narrow side street just blocks from where Jill had last been seen. Inside was Jill's identification, her belongings, her phone. The discovery should have been a breakthrough, but detectives quickly realized something was wrong. This laneway had already been searched. Officers had walked through it days earlier as part of the initial sweep. The bag had not been there then, which meant someone had placed it there afterward. The implications were immediate and devastating. This was not a random disappearance. This was not a woman who had wandered off or suffered an accident. Someone had taken Jill's belongings and then returned them deliberately, as if taunting. The investigation. The case shifted. What had begun as a missing person inquiry now became a suspected homicide. Police ramped up their efforts. More officers were assigned. More footage was reviewed. And the public, which had been following the case with growing concern, now watched with a new kind of fear. Someone had Jill. Someone was playing a game. Within hours, investigators made a critical decision. They would release the CCTV footage to the public. The image of Jill standing with the stranger on Sydney Road, the last confirmed sighting, would be broadcast across every news outlet in the country. If anyone knew who the man in the hoodie was, police needed to hear from them. The clock was ticking. And the handbag had just confirmed what many had feared from the beginning. Jill Meagher was not lost. She had been taken. The decision was made on Tuesday evening. Police had spent days reviewing footage, tracing timelines, and searching for any physical evidence that might explain what had happened to Jill Meagher. The handbag discovery had confirmed their worst fears. This was no longer a search for a missing woman. It was a hunt for a predator, and the only lead they had was a man in a hoodie, captured on camera for less than 30 seconds. Investigators made the call to release the CCTV footage to the public. It was a calculated risk. Releasing evidence mid-investigation could compromise the case, alert the suspect, or trigger a flood of false leads. But detectives believed the potential reward outweighed the danger. Someone out there knew this man. Someone had seen him before. And if they could identify him quickly, they might still have a chance to find Jill. The footage aired on every major news network in Australia. Within hours, the clip had been shared thousands of times across social media. The grainy image of Jill standing beside a stranger became the most watched piece of surveillance video in the country. People studied the man's posture, his clothing, the way he stood. They analyzed the angle of his shoulders, the shape of his hoodie, the way he seemed to lean toward her without touching. Tips began flooding into the police hotline. Some were vague, some were mistaken. But among the noise, a pattern began to emerge. Multiple callers pointed to the same name, the same face, the same man. Investigators worked through the night, cross-referencing the tips, pulling records, building a profile. The clock was ticking. Every hour that passed was another hour the suspect remained free. Another hour Jill's family waited without answers. By Wednesday morning, detectives had a name, and when they ran it through the system, what they found was far worse than anyone had imagined. The name was Adrian Bayley. He was 41 years old, a resident of the Melbourne suburbs, and, to the casual observer, he appeared unremarkable. He had a wife. He had a home. He walked the same streets as everyone else. But Adrian Bayley was not who he appeared to be. When investigators pulled his criminal record, they discovered a history that stretched back more than 2 decades. Bayley had first been convicted of violent sexual offenses in 1991 when he was just 20 years old. He had attacked multiple women in a series of brutal assaults, targeting strangers in public places, using force and intimidation to overpower his victims. He had been sentenced to prison. He had served time. And then, inexplicably, he had been released. In the years that followed, Bayley had reoffended. He had been arrested again. He had been convicted again. And yet, each time, the system had eventually returned him to the streets. Parole boards had approved his release. Courts had accepted his claims of rehabilitation. By 2012, despite a documented history of predatory violence against women, Adrian Bayley was a free man. He was on parole the night he encountered Jill Meagher. The revelation sent shockwaves through the investigation and through the public. This was not a random act by an unknown stranger. This was a calculated attack by a serial predator who should never have been free in the first place. Detectives now had a suspect. They had a motive. And they had a growing body of evidence linking Bayley to the area around Sydney Road on the night Jill disappeared. The manhunt had narrowed to a single target. And time was running out. If cases like this remind you why justice matters and why these stories need to be told, subscribe now so you never miss what comes next. On Wednesday, September 26th, 5 days after Jill Meagher vanished, police moved in. Adrian Bayley was taken into custody at his home in the Melbourne suburb of Coburg, just a few kilometers from where Jill had last been seen. Officers arrived in force, surrounding the property and executing a search warrant while Bayley was detained and transported to the station for questioning. Inside the house, forensic teams began their work. They collected clothing, electronics, and personal items. They searched for traces of Jill, DNA, fibers, anything that might connect Bayley to the crime. Every surface was examined, every item cataloged. At the station, detectives began the interrogation. Bayley was calm at first, evasive. He answered questions with half-truths and deflections, offering nothing that might incriminate him. He denied knowing Jill. He denied being on Sydney Road that night. He denied everything. But the evidence was already closing in. CCTV footage placed him at the scene. Witness statements confirmed his presence in the area, and his criminal history painted a damning portrait of a man who had spent decades targeting women in exactly the same way.
She was buried several metres off the dirt road under a tall leafy tree. Homicide detectives and forensic police have spent several hours examining the scene. It's a very remote area surrounded by paddocks and only accessible by dirt road. 41-year-old Adrian Ernest Bayley has been charged with the rape and murder.
As the hours passed, investigators increased the pressure. They laid out the timeline. They showed him the footage. They made clear that the walls were closing in. And then, in the early hours of the following morning, Adrian Bayley made a decision that would seal his fate. He stopped denying. He started talking. What he revealed next would bring the investigation to its darkest and most devastating conclusion. Bayley led them north. Under police escort, he directed officers out of Melbourne and into the rural bushland beyond the city limits. The convoy traveled along quiet roads, past farmland and scattered trees, deeper into the countryside with every passing kilometer. Finally, they stopped. The location was a stretch of isolated bushland near Gisborne South, roughly 50 kilometers from Sydney Road. It was the kind of place few people would ever think to search. Remote, overgrown, and far from any witnesses. There, hidden among the undergrowth, investigators found Jill Meagher's body. She had been buried in a shallow grave. The scene was processed with the grim precision that homicide investigators know all too well. Forensic teams documented every detail. Evidence was collected. The area was cordoned off and searched for additional traces. For the detectives who had spent nearly a week searching for Jill, the moment was one of quiet devastation. They had hoped, against all reason, that they might still find her alive, that the case might end differently, that the woman in the CCTV footage might somehow have survived. But there would be no rescue, no reunion, only confirmation of what they had feared from the beginning. Tom Meagher was notified. Jill's family in Ireland received the call no parent should ever have to answer. The woman they loved, the daughter and sister and wife who had called just days ago to say she was almost home, was gone. The search was over. The grief was just beginning. Adrian Bayley stood before the court in March 2013. He did not plead innocent. He did not claim mistaken identity. He did not attempt to minimize what he had done. He pleaded guilty to the rape and murder of Jill Meagher. The courtroom was silent as the details of the crime were read into the record. Prosecutors described how Bayley had approached Jill on Sydney Road, how he had lured her into conversation, and how he had attacked her in a laneway just meters from where the CCTV camera had captured their final interaction. They described what followed in clinical, restrained terms, language designed to convey the horror without sensationalizing it. Jill had fought, she had resisted, but Bayley had overpowered her. Afterward, he had taken her body to the bushland near Gisborne South and buried her in a shallow grave. He had returned to his life as though nothing had happened. Justice Jeffrey Nettle delivered the sentence: life imprisonment, a minimum non-parole period of 35 years. But the case did not end there. In the months and years that followed, additional victims came forward. Women who had been attacked by Bayley in the years before Jill's death, women who had never reported their assaults, now found the courage to speak. Their testimony led to further convictions. Bayley's non-parole period was extended to 43 years. He will likely die in prison. For Jill's family, the sentence offered a measure of justice, but no comfort. No verdict could undo what had been done. No prison term could bring her back.
We are devastated. We are heartbroken. She was the first grandchild my mother had, and our aunties, uncles, and cousins are powerless to describe their loss. There are no words to describe how we feel at what has happened. We acknowledge the role that social media has played in the search for Jill. We believe that it has helped us in the search, but it's not the outcome that we had hoped and prayed for.
The trial was over. The legal record was complete, but the loss remained. In the years since Jill Meagher's death, her memory has become inseparable from the reforms it inspired. Her case exposed catastrophic failures in Victoria's parole and correction system. Adrian Bayley should not have been free the night he encountered Jill. He had violated parole conditions multiple times. He had reoffended repeatedly. And yet, the system had released him again and again. Public outrage demanded change. An independent review of the parole system was commissioned. Legislation was tightened. The threshold for releasing violent offenders was raised. Supervision requirements were strengthened. The failures that allowed Bayley to walk free were examined, documented, and, at least in part, corrected. Jill's husband, Tom Meagher, became an advocate for a different kind of reform. In the aftermath of the tragedy, he spoke publicly about the danger of framing violence against women as the result of individual monsters. The real problem, he argued, was cultural, rooted in attitudes that excused, minimized, or ignored violence until it was too late. His words reached audiences around the world. A memorial was established in Brunswick. On the anniversary of her death, flowers are still laid along Sydney Road. Her name is spoken at vigils, at rallies, at moments when communities gather to mourn and to demand better. Stories like Jill's deserve to be remembered. Subscribe to make sure you're here for everyone we tell. Jill Meagher was 29 years old. She was walking home. She believed she was safe. She deserved to be. The footage remains. The case is closed, but the work her death inspired continues, unfinished, urgent, and carried forward by those who refuse to forget.